Started here with the Gestalt IT rundown in just a second. I hope everybody's having a happy, the hump part of hump day. I guess. Well, I don't want to say the hump part, the middle part of hump day. We're in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week, is what I'm trying to say.
I wish I had a hump part.
I'm uncomfortable with all hump day talk anyway. It's silly. It indicates a normal distribution of days. Anyway, Ken, how's it going? Other than my awkwardness.
Oh, wonderful! You just enhanced my day, so thank you.
Ken, I have a very important question before we get started with the show.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to hear a TCP joke?
Yes, I would like to hear a TCP joke.
All right, I'm going to tell you a TCP joke.
Okay, I will hear a TCP joke.
Are you ready to hear a TCP joke?
Yes, I am ready to hear a TCP joke.
Okay, I'm about to send the TCP joke. It'll last about 10 seconds. It has 2 characters. It does not have a setting. It ends with a punchline.
Okay, I'm ready to get your TCP joke that will last about 10 seconds, have 2 characters and not an explicit setting, and ends with a punchline.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your connection has timed out. Hey, would you like to hear a TCP joke? Shh, thank you.
And I'm telling you a UDP joke right now. I don't know if you're getting it or not.
What? It's all fuzzy. You guys. We got the jokes. All right, Ken, I think now that the humor part of the show is over, we're going to get into the sick content. So let's get started with a little Gestalt IT rundown. Hello, all, and welcome to the Gestalt IT rundown, your weekly look at the IT news of the week. I'm your host, Rich Stroffolino, editor with Gestalt IT. Joining me from across the interstate is the one, the only, the cloud man himself, Ken Nalbone. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Rich.
It's been a big week. We had events going on. We Gestalt IT was in places. We were seeing the news as it was happening. But before we get to that, it's so jam packed. We have to rush through a couple things with little items I like to call news or not. You ready, Ken?
I am ready.
All right, the first news or not item. Mark Zuckerberg published an op-ed in the Washington Post calling for internet regulation across 4 areas: harmful content, election integrity, privacy, and data portability. Interestingly, the Washington Post doesn't use the Oxford comma. In the piece, he suggests creating third-party bodies to set standards governing the distribution of harmful content and having companies graded against those standards. So maybe taking a little liability off Facebook there. Privacy regulation in the mold of the EU's GDPR, and support for the Data Transfer Project for standardizing data portability. Is Zuck turning a new leaf here, or is he just passing the buck on to regulators to take some of the heat off Facebook? News or not?
I say nah. I say Zuck and Facebook are trying to win back the trust of public with some kind of announcement, seemingly on a weekly basis these days. But they've got a long road ahead of them, right? So
yeah,
good luck with that.
They've spent a couple years burning that bridge. It's going to take more than a couple days rebuilding it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, a pen tester tipped ZDNet that over 13,500 Iscuzzy clusters were listed on the internet-connected device search engine Shodan that didn't have any authentication enabled. So you could just go ahead and just get in there. Those ports were totally open. ZDNet found that they belonged to a YMCA branch, a Russian government agency, universities, and many, many, many private companies in just their small sampling to kind of verify this. At this point, is misconfiguration authentication news or not, Ken?
Misconfiguration of authentication, I guess, nah. But to me, leaving something like Iscuzzy open to the internet in the first place is. I typically, when I was a sysadmin, would never put Iscuzzy on a routable network if I could hand it, much less one that was accessible via the internet. What are people thinking doing this? I have no idea.
It does seem a little baffling, but stranger things have happened. Less baffling, though, is a report from IDC on hyperconverged infrastructure that shows that Dell EMC led the market for branded systems with 28.6% of market share in Q4, with VMware on top of the software market with a 38.1% of the market share, so a little bit more dominant there. Kind of the big name I think a lot of people think of, at least maybe in our audience with hyperconverged, Nutanix was number 2 in both categories, but with the slowest revenue growth in both in the top 3 of both categories, and notably seeing market share fall where the other 2 in the top 3 were seeing notable growth. Nutanix not growing as fast in HCI. News or not, Ken?
Kind of, yeah, because they were one of the first players in the space. It was kind of them, SimpliVity, and Scale Computing, I would say, were the first 3 big entrants all pretty much at the same time. Growth in this market in general, though, is not news at all. Because it's kind of expected, right? It's been a rocket ship for the past few years, HCI in general, and when it comes to the whole converged infrastructure thing, and it's part of the whole story of IT departments wanting to focus less on day-to-day operations and more on solving business problems. And babysitting infrastructure doesn't do that. So yes, I would like my converged infrastructure or hyper-converged infrastructure to take a lot of the work out of my hands. Regardless of what happens in Nutanix, I think we'll still see growth in this space, but they've got some work to basically reclaim their top status that they had at one point.
Yeah, on the software side, it wasn't quite as dire. I think they were seeing 50% growth compared to like 65, 70% growth from VMware. But the big thing on the branded systems was, they were seeing 20% revenue growth, I want to say, whereas Dell EMC was like 80%, and so like really maintaining that lead position. And HPE in number 3 was also seeing like mid 60s revenue growth on the year. So interesting numbers there. Definitely be keeping an eye on that for next quarter. All right. Something else to keep an eye on. You may have had a missed flight or maybe a delayed flight on Monday, as hundreds of flights were delayed or canceled due to the crash of a SaaS flight management platform, AeroData. Although only out for about 40 minutes, this crash caused over 600 delays on Southwest alone, with a lot of commuter airlines affected as well. AeroData is a family-owned business with a website last updated in 2009 with a otherwise almost non-existent profile. Trusting flights with software from a website that says it's about to upgrade to Silverlight soon. News or not here, Ken?
Yeah, I think it's news. Every time I hear about some kind of critical piece of infrastructure, whether it's private or public, that is based on woefully outdated IT, I'm concerned. It's like you said, their website hasn't been updated since 2009, and it claims that they're going to upgrade to a deprecated platform in Silverlight. Maybe it's time for regulators or somebody to take a look at this. Despite all the celebrations around next generation cloud native distributed Kubernetes microservices based applications, we still have a lot of this going on.
Yeah,
and it's not good. So yeah, it's news to me.
All right, and our last news or not item, Linux developer Christopher Hellwig and the Software Freedom Conservancy sued VMware back in 2015 for illegally distributing Linux code found in the VMware ESX hypervisor, but have decided not to appeal the case after being dismissed by the German Hamburg Higher Regional Court. So they had already taken it one step in an appeal. The court had dismissed the case over failure by Hellwig to assert the right of ownership over Linux code. VMware getting away with allegedly stealing open source code. News or not here, Ken?
I say nah, simply because we also know that VMware is basically committed to removing all Linux code from the ESXi kernel in the future anyway. So even if it was an issue, it shouldn't be at some point. Nah.
Okay. I do think it's interesting. This was noted back in 2006, and we're just seeing a resolution of it now. I wonder, will this set a precedent? I guess would be the only concern I would have. But in this particular case, yeah, I don't think it's a major issue for VMware going forward. Kind of our big first discussion story I want to talk about. I saw this come out Monday. Wanted to make sure it wasn't an April Fool's joke, just because April 1st, the internet is a horrible place to be. But Cloudflare announced an update to their 1.1.1.1 app, which I always have to count on my fingers, make sure I get the proper amount of ones there, which now integrates a VPN called Warp. If you're not familiar with the app, it was a DNS resolver for your smartphone, basically using Cloudflare's DNS. Supposedly would speed up load times, be more private, that kind of stuff. Warp encrypts all internet traffic from the device to the point that it hits Cloudflare's network, and uses a Google-developed protocol called QUIC, which builds on UDP to offer improved reliability, replacing TCP, which I thought was really interesting. Cloudflare claims that using QUIC and routing traffic over their wide network would noticeably decrease page loads while offering improved security, kind of just building on what the app was already doing, but with more of a VPN, encrypted focus. You can now join a waitlist for access to Warp in the app, and as of April 1st, with paid plans available for greater access coming soon. Is this Cloudflare effectively bridging the gap between kind of the WAN optimization / SD-WAN and more standard VPN offerings? Ken, this seemed really interesting to me.
I don't know if I'd go that far exactly. Granted, I'm not our resident networking nerd. He's out of town at the moment, and he'd probably be able to speak more intelligently about this topic. But the fact that it's only on phones from the beginning is clearly not, bridging a gap between enterprise and consumers, because enterprise needs far more than phones. They need infrastructure. They need, workstations and laptops to have capabilities to access the WAN optimized link or the SD-WAN type link. I do think it's cool though, and I'd like to try it out. But again, I also got on that wait list. I don't know what your waitlist number is, Rich, but mine is well over 370,000.
Oh,
So I might be waiting a while.
176,000. So
oh, lucky you! I didn't sign up until today, so that's my fault. I think it's interesting that they're talking about quick replacing TCP. Well, I mean, most VPN protocols, I believe, have been based on something connectionless to begin with. UDP, because the idea is the traffic that you're encapsulating, it's connection oriented itself. You don't need to double up on that kind of protocol. So I think it's cool. But regardless, when your traffic hits the internet, regardless of what VPN you're using, then you're subject to the latencies and the transport protocols that will be used to connect to whatever endpoint, whatever service you're going to be using. So seeing the VPN itself sped up is cool, and I think that this might have teeth, but at the end of the day, you're still subject to the unpredictability of the internet as soon as you leave it.
Yeah, and also, always, I think Cloudflare has a little bit of a place of a trusted company for the most part. I know some people have had some issues with content neutrality and certain parties that they protect with their service or whatnot. But I always have my shields up a little bit whenever I hear free VPN, regardless of who it's coming from, because it costs money to operate that. I don't know how they're making money. They were saying, they're not selling your data to ISPs, and that kind of stuff. I have no reason to think that they would be lying about that, for sure.
I think it's just, we're going to give you the free service and offer you the opportunity to sign up for our better service when it doesn't quite meet your needs.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
pretty popular model.
I did have to. I do use the 1.1.1.1 DNS resolver, but I do have it turned off, like when I'm at home and stuff like that, just because it does add a little bit of jankiness. I've found at times, so I'm wondering how if Warp will make that worse or a little bit better. So it'll be interesting.
We'll have to wait and see.
Something that's definitely worse and not better is what security researchers published. They published a proof of concept code late last week demonstrating a flaw in the Magento e-commerce platform that's been present since version 1. Yay! Using a SQL injection vulnerability without authentication, the flaw allows for passwords and username hashes to be downloaded. So not anything in plain text. It's still, it's still hashed, but once cracked, could obviously lead to a lot of mayhem, presumably in installing pay skimmers or something like that, and you'd have no way of knowing. The injection attack can be easily automated with security researchers, which security researchers warn makes the exploitation a matter of time, not necessarily, if it's going to happen. A standalone and update patch are both available, but all previous versions of Magento are vulnerable. Adobe just launched their Commerce Cloud. They bought Magento, I believe, 2 years ago now, or maybe a year and a half ago, for a cool couple billion. So they just launched Commerce Cloud, which effectively offers Magento as a service. Is this the best advertisement for that, since presumably this would be updated right away, or is this just a bad exploit?
What it is convenient timing for Adobe right after the launch of the Magento service, I suppose. But I'm not necessarily suggesting some kind of conspiracy theory. I think it's probably coincidence. It's another week, another exploit, right? And it kind of underscores the fact that the constant patching and unplanned maintenance cycles that are the bane of many an IT admin or manager. So the idea of consuming the Magento as a service and taking a lot of the load off of your operations staff is appealing, right? I think that's the case with just about anything. Even if there's no security concerns, there's always time and productivity lost to these kinds of activities that don't add value. Basically, making sure that we're up to date, we're safe from the bugs and the exploits. That's very important, but it doesn't necessarily add revenue to a business. So most people are trying to get away from it anyway. So sure, let's take a look at Magento's service platform, or Adobe's Magento service platform, so we don't have to worry about these kinds of things in one more area of our enterprise IT business anymore.
I am at least encouraged that the standalone's out there, so there should be no reason you can't implement this right away. I know there's big problems upgrading versions and that kind of stuff that can just kind of break back ends of businesses and stuff like that. So having the standalone there is really convenient. But yeah, I can only imagine how insanely frustrating this is, where you keep up on all your, and you could still you keep up on everything. You have good security protocol. You're hashing your passwords and stuff like that, and you can still get blindsided by this, and it's been there the whole time. Like that to me is the scariest part, right? That it's literally been something that could have been exploited.
So this has been released as a proof of concept, but is it available for like the bad guys yet? Basically,
Yeah, it's on GitHub. I was looking at the notes on GitHub.
So anybody who's vulnerable could be being attacked right now.
Yeah, and it should be noted, like when it was published, when they published the exploit on GitHub, they had done disclosure to Adobe, and that's why the patches are available as of the date of reporting on it. So please install those patches, please. Next up on the rundown here, Cisco CEO Chuck Robbins told CRN that the company is on track to meet its promise of 30% of revenue coming from software and services over the next 3 years, with networking subscriptions like those found in the Catalyst 9000 making up 65% of software revenues. 57% of revenue still comes from switching and router hardware. So, what you think of, I think, when a lot of people think of Cisco, but the vast majority of Cisco's engineers are now working on software. I think it was 80% in the report I was reading. Will this shift in revenue eventually cause us to think of Cisco as a software company, Ken? And is this growth in subscriptions reflective of actual change, or is this like Cisco just saying, we're going to sell subscription now, so you buy subscription now? And like, to me, that wasn't as significant as overall that kind of shift in revenue, right?
Yeah, and Cisco has been for a while trying to reposition themselves as a software company. I think they'd much rather have recurring revenue from subscriptions and things of that nature. The recurring revenue is more attractive because it's predictable. Whether or not your overall revenue increases, at least you kind of have an idea of what it will be. It only makes sense for their customers if they know that they're no longer focusing on purchasing product. If for some reason Cisco has some kind of offering where, yes, here's your hardware that came with your software subscription and your service. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the whole Magento thing. Now operations are less of your concern, and you just, maintain this subscription or this contract with us, and things will be taken care of. Otherwise, it's just another thing IT has to spend money on, which is not so attractive, right?
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting that we're seeing kind of two giants, enterprise and consumer. We're seeing Apple make the same push, trying to divest from purely being a hardware company into definitely getting into services heavy. So I just thought that was an interesting maybe parallel there. All right, and finally, big event from Intel. They had their Data-Centric Innovation Day 2019. We were actually there with the Tech Field Day exclusive, so you can check that out. Some of the more detailed presentations at techfieldday.com. But if you haven't caught any of the announcements, there were a bunch, so let's get them covered here. Intel announced all of their data center things. First one was the second generation Xeon scalable processors, now with up to 56 cores. Kind of academically, they're in a single socket. We also had, so you have up to 56 cores. The scalables now have Optane DC support, Spectre hardware mitigations, and AVX 512 modes for advanced machine learning stuff outside. That you're able to optimize for that and not have to use necessarily a GPU or something like that. Interestingly, these use the same microarchitecture as the last Xeons, which is based on Skylake. Although obviously there's been some there's been some minor tweaks here and there. There was also the official debut of data center persistent memory modules, allowing for Optane installed in DIMM slots, providing for up to 6 terabytes of addressable storage class non-volatile memory. We also saw the first new products coming out of Intel's acquisition of Altera way back in 2015 for a cool $16 billion. I think people forget about that sometimes. Intel released Agilex, which is their new FPGA family with 10 nanometer chips coming out in Q3. 10 nanometer, kind of a magic number for Intel there. These can offer 40 teraflops of DSP performance, and Intel sees them becoming increasingly relevant in mixed machine learning use cases. There was also the new 800 series 100 gigabit Ethernet controller and the Xeon D1600, a true system on a chip with 8 Broadwell cores, 128 gigabytes of memory, designed for, kind of edge devices, mid-range storage, routers, and the like. Ken, just a jam-packed announcement. What stood out?
That's a lot of stuff, and all of it kind of cool in its own way, right? To me, the most impressive thing is the Optane persistent memory. I think that will have the most lasting impact. I think that in the long run, we're going to see basically new application architectures and major changes in the way infrastructure is designed in the years to come. All these other ones are certainly innovative and interesting, but that's the one that stands out for me for that simple reason. What are we going to see? It's not going to replace other storage like your SSDs, your spinning disks if you're still using them for archival storage, but it adds something new and something to consider when designing applications that can make use of near the same speeds as DRAM, but have persistence. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think the big thing that stands out for a lot of people, I think, reading this story is capacity, right? The ability to have those 6 terabytes of memory. You can just dump your whole database in there. You get really great latency and all that kind of stuff. And if you're not familiar with how the Optane DC stuff works, basically you have to still have like at least one regular DIMM of DDR4, whatever. I think they support up to DDR4 2933 or something like that megahertz. But you still need to have like 128 gigabytes of that in there, and that basically serves as a buffer between the Optane and the system, right? So everything hits the DRAM, the regular DRAM first, then it's kind of processed back and forth to the Optane stuff. And I think that capacity really is a huge story. But yeah, like you were saying, having the long range implementation of non-volatile stuff, again, we're only just starting to see the beginning of how we conceive of that, because that's a fundamental shift in, I guess it's not a fundamental shift. It's actually, I think Stephen Foskett pointed this out in a piece that we published on Gestalt IT, that this is actually a shift back to the very earliest days of computing, when memory wasn't, memory doesn't by nature have to be volatile, right? The earliest memories out there, when we're talking about like UNIVAC and stuff like that, were persistent, right? And it was only when DRAM was super fast and relatively affordable that we kind of moved over to the volatile model. So still a huge shift, and I think how that will impact applications. The Intel, the scalable Xeons and stuff. Obviously, this is kind of trading blows with what AMD has released with EPYC. I do think it's interesting, one, that they're still holding on to that, those Skylake Xeons. They really can't seem to move on from that architecture. Great to see the Spectre migrations there, the hardware Spectre migrations, because we reported on this a couple weeks ago that basically the software mitigations, it's a mixed bag and nothing really solves the problem completely. We have this in hardware now. I think that's a really great step in that direction, to kind of peace of mind going forward. Having the 56 cores, again, like I said, it's kind of an academic argument. Yes, they're technically in one socket. They basically do the same thing that AMD does with their EPYC, where it's just 2 processors and one big chip that has a super fast interconnect between the two. It actually reminds me a little bit of what Intel did with their original dual cores back in the day with the Pentium D, where it's basically just 2 the quad cores. Their first quad cores was just 2 dual cores stacked together. So if you have the workloads for that, it's going to be great. I don't think anyone needs the 400 watt TDP that it's going to be, but
right,
very interesting. Although long-term for viability, right? Optane's cool. I think that has some big implications down the road, but Intel as a company long-term, I think the FPGA stuff could be just as huge down the road, right? Because their Altera stuff had, they had new releases, but there was nothing that Altera hadn't already been working on that had been released. This is kind of the new IP for them, and hence why they're changing, the naming nomenclature there. So seeing how that will long-term kind of disrupt, hopefully, I think Intel hopes disrupts what right now is the GPU dominance in the machine learning AI kind of workloads, and how that will impact them going forward. I think that could be maybe the biggest long-term. Right now, they're not even, they're not shipping them for another quarter or so, or another quarter. So, who's to say how big the impact's going to be, and if they can ever ship 10 nanometers, we'll see. But I mean, just huge announcement. And if you want any more detail on this, I really recommend techfieldday.com. Like I said, we had our Techfield Day exclusive out there doing live streams. We had Stephen Foskett doing a live blog. You can check out our show notes for that as well, or just head over to gestaltit.com. Lots of good stuff. And good to see Intel kind of swinging for the fences. I think, we are certainly not adverse to piling on Intel for maybe being a little staid, a little kind of stuck in a rut as of late on a number of levels. But this shows that, they can still really swing for the fences. They're still a gigantic company with amazing research. And I think this is the fruits of a lot of that.
Yeah, I agree. And, more to the point, I thought it was interesting when I saw these high core count Xeons come out. The first thought I had was, who is going to be able to fill a rack with these and power and cool it? Maybe the hyperscalers, but just delivering that to a rack is an exercise in engineering that I can't really begin to tackle myself. So there's a market for those somewhere. I'm not sure who it is yet, but
I just want to know if I can run Crisis on it. That's That's all I care about.
You'll need a GPU as well.
Oh, dang it.
Maybe you can run it on Google Stadia, but that was last week's story.
Does that come with the what is it, Intel ultra high definition 620 graphics, like I can get my laptop, right? That should be good.
Sure, I don't see why not. Or even better in your MacBook.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting. Yeah, I will also be, because those are getting sold directly to OEMs, right? Like you're never going to see that on sale anywhere. So it'll be interesting to see how those are bundled into products and how those are positioned. Yeah, going forward. And also like the insane, you're right, the insane cooling that you're just going to need liquid nitrogen just pumped right onto that processor.
And the power. I mean, you could fit a couple of those in a 1U box, and theoretically fit 42 of them in a single rack, or maybe a couple less once you put in some switches. But how are you going to deliver enough power for that?
You have your nuclear power plant right next door.
I guess so.
It's no problem, Ken. Don't worry about it. It'll be easy. Just like the Gestalt IT Rundown. Ken, thank you so much for being here today. Where can people find more about you and what you're writing on the cyberspace?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Ken Nalbone. I also write a lot on Gestalt IT. And be sure to check out Tech Field Day as well. We will be having Cloud Field Day beginning next week, April 10th. You can watch the live stream on techfieldday.com. You can see me up there introducing a lot of exciting new companies and some of our returning friends as well. Then I get out of the way and let the interesting people talk. So be sure to check that out.
Oh, Ken, don't be modest. People are tuning in for you too. And if you want to find more of my stuff, you can check out gestaltit.com or find me on Twitter at Mr. Anthropology. There may be humorous observations about having small children. Wow, that's going to be so interesting. But you can also find us every Wednesday here at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, coming to you live with the Gestalt IT Rundown. I'm turning up the music now, so that means the show is over. Ken, thank you so much. We'll be back, like I said, next week. Until then, remember, everybody, have a super sparkly day.